Okay, so this is the Hornet Cold and Dark startup procedure. The purpose of this video is not to teach you how to start the Hornet up, it's more or less show you the high fidelity nature of a Hornet, and you can expect this across the F-18s, the F-16s, all of the major pay-wear aircraft that are currently on the market. And there's a lot of them. A-18 is probably the most complex system I think I've ever flown, and I'm still to date unable to fly that. I need to put more time and effort into it. So when you first boot up, you'll come to the screen, and the reason I've left this up here is just to show you that sometimes you need to read through this, and this could be some good reasons. Start time will determine your lighting situation. So if you are going to be using, if going to a low light or dark scenario, you need to obviously turn on your lights, and then you'll have things like objectives, some other details around here like frequencies if you play multiplayer is quite important, and also just where you're based could help for your navigation side, so just do pay attention to this stuff. Okay, so now we've booted into the aircraft itself. This is cold and dark, which means that all systems are off. Bear in mind, I fly with the pilot model on, and that is because I quite like the immersion of having a pilot. But if you are learning, it's best to get rid of it. So the idea is that you can use hotkeys, and Shift P, right Shift P for me turns off the pilot, and it should for you too. Now this can be found in your settings, which is adjust controls, and you can find it in here. And to search for a command, you just type in here. It tells you what keys are bound for that particular one. So if you ever need to find out a key command, you're going to go back to that quite a lot. It is pretty common when you are learning to fly to do a lot of searching. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do in my F-18 is I'm going to introduce power. So I'm going to go to the battery switch, turn that on. Once the battery's on, I'm going to go straight to my APU. Now the key thing to remember here, I don't follow any checklists, I don't follow any guides, and a lot of DCS gamers do not do that, and the reason for that is you kind of don't need to. We are gamers at the end of the day. Checklists are great if you're a sort of military sim type person and you want to get right into it, but the thing I've done is I've learnt my workflows, and that's all that matters really to me. So for me, my APU's on, I'm going to crank my engine. If you ever buy the F-18, you'll notice my sounds are a bit different. I've actually bought a sound pack for my F-18 to make it a little bit different. Quite like the sounds of this one. So as this is booting up, I'm looking at my RPM. RPM's set to 28, so I'm going to introduce fuel, and it's going to start booting up. While it's doing that, I'm going to switch on my screens. And these knobs, a good way to do it if you're using a mouse is to click it and drag up, and it will work as a sort of like a dial. As the aircraft boots up, it's going to go through its flight procedures. First thing you want to do, or first you get rid of this by clicking the bottom of the base of the stick, and that's for most aircraft. We need to align our INS, and the best way to do that is, well, the only way to do that, flick over to INS on the ground, and then down here you'll see standard heading. Hit that button there, and it'll start the INS process. The INS basically aligns our aircraft to our navigational start point. Very important if you're ever deploying weapons to have your INS fixed and located. So that's like set on any aircraft. Okay, while that's starting to align, it will take about a minute or two. I'm going to start from the left, and I go through turning my oxygen on, coming through here. Obviously I've got to start my other engine, so I'm cranking that. Now if you were to load up new munitions or anything else, you would, on the pylons here, you wouldn't necessarily hit your trim button, takeoff trim button, because you're still waiting to get your fuel introduced or your extra weight, and that'll automatically trim your aircraft. F-18 has some pretty sophisticated systems that does a lot of work for you. Just going to introduce fuel now. As you see, it's booting up. And that is about right. So from here I'm going to reset my FCS. That clears my warnings. I'm going to hit my trim button because I'm not adding any munitions. Now if you're doing nighttime flight or anything else, you can put your position lights on and your formation lights, and that will put some green bars around your aircraft. So if you look at around the aircraft here, those lines present glow at night and allows your wingman to see you. I added my position light so you can see my red light there and my green light on this side will obviously glow, and you've got your strap lights going off as well. That's what those are, and they're really handy if you are doing night flights, when in multiplayer particularly. Okay, from here I'm going to switch my flaps to half for takeoff. I'm going to head up and I'm going to slowly work my way around the aircraft. So first thing is IFF. I turn my IFF, I hit it on, go to my data link, on, data link arm 2 on. So there's two different data links. One is for your carrier and the other one is for data link connected to AWACS and other aircraft that will send information. Like anything that uses link 16 will basically send information through to your aircraft. That's why we use that data link. Very important that goes on, otherwise you're kind of flying with your radar and that's it. Down here we uncage our standby indicator. Moving back down here, in the manual you're supposed to do a reset on your bleed air, not really that important. And then head down here. I chuck my radar on operational now because I forget otherwise, but you're supposed to put that on standby, and then once you get in the air you switch it on, obviously for radiation purposes in real life. I haven't got a FLIR module, so I'm not going to turn that on, and I'm not going to do any laser stuff because I haven't got those fixed. I can now check to make sure my INS is aligned, so okay. So now I just go over here and I switch this over to in-flight authentic alignment, IFA, which is supposed to use GPS to keep it aligned. The other settings like nav is an old setting, and then they introduce the GPS system to IFA. Almost ready to go now. Like I said, I don't muck around with all the proper ways of doing things because we are a gaming pilot, so we don't have to muck around. I'll chuck my ejection seat armed, close my canopy. Okay, canopy closed, and then from there I'm going to turn on my radar warning systems, and what that does is activates RWR, which then tells us in what direction enemy are, and gives us warnings of missile locks and things like that. In my displays, I'm not going to go into any of these because this is a whole other kettle of fish, but I will just turn on my HUD information, and that will give me any directions of friendly and enemy forces on my HUD for quick referencing. This obviously shows your map. You can change the scales of your maps that are built in, and quite handy when you're doing navigation and the likes. And lastly, ECM, I turn that on to transmit. Sometimes, depending what kind of missile systems you use, for example, if you use Fox 2s, which are like your Sparrows, you might just go and record because it will interfere with launching infrared, or passive radar type seeking. Now again, I am no expert at this game, I just play it the way I play it, so what I'm telling you now may not be best practice. By all means go out and have a look at some guides from people that actually know what they're doing. The last one I do is I put my dispenser on bypass, which means that I manually dispense my flares and my chaff. If you put it on and you set up a dispensing program through the system, generally speaking the Hornet's terrible for wasting countermeasures, and it will ultimately deplete them if you ever get into sort of air combat in that role. Alright, that's pretty much a cold and dark. From here I can take off, and I'll just quickly show what I do here. So I'll take my brakes off, do a quick check. I'll turn this back on. And I'll slowly accelerate. Usually you would obviously contact tower and request taxi clearance, but in this case I'm just going to get there. With the Hornet, it's got a really, because it's a carrier-based aircraft, it's got a normal nose wheel steering, and then it's got a high sensitive nose wheel steering setting, which if you map it onto your HOTAS, it'll be generally the pinky button. And I'll show you what it looks like when we get up to the runway. I'm a BR pilot. I don't usually fly flat screen, and I'm using a track IR, which is not something I use very often, so I am struggling a bit here. Bear with me. The other thing that you consider too is your radios, and this is where your radios sit on a Hornet, and when we play multiplayer, usually use both radios. So you'll have two radios with two frequencies. You can punch in your frequencies in the keypad here, and you can store them pretty easily. So now I'm turning with my rudder, and I'm going to hit the. You can see the difference there. She turns really fast on a dime. Really handy if you're lining up to a catapult on a carrier. So line up to the centre line, hit my brakes. If you are flying in formation, you would increase your throttle up to about 80 RPM, and then from there release brakes and go full noise. Now the rudder gets quite sensitive when you start getting some speed up, and from there we're going to rotate. As soon as you're off the ground, gear up, flaps up. If you're going full afterburner and you don't put your gear up in time, you could damage your gear, which may not sound too important when you're flying to a mission, but it really will affect your mission because you can't drop bombs if you've damaged your gear. Anyway, that is the cold start to takeoff. We'll now move on to my next video, which will be flying something a bit simpler to see the differences between sort of Gen 4 and other aircraft like choppers.